I stopped counting the years the day my aunt told me I'd never be more than someone else's shadow. She said it at her kitchen table, like she was commenting on the weather, calm, certain, cruel in that casual way only family can be. I remember nodding, pretending it didn't cut through me, pretending I hadn't spent half my life keeping quiet, keeping steady, keeping peace, because that's what I did. I kept things together while they tore me apart. They never saw the long nights, the choices I carried, the silence I wore like armor. To them, I was small, safe to underestimate. But that night, something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I realized I'd mistaken endurance for peace, that I'd been holding my breath for people who'd never notice if I stopped breathing. And for the first time, I didn't swallow it. I didn't nod. I just looked at her, really looked, and knew she had no idea what was coming. Not yet. I hadn't driven this road in 15 years. The coast curved like a scar carved into Maine's shoreline, where the salt air and thawing snow mixed into something sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. My silver Subaru crawled up the hill toward the Witmore estate, a white house sitting too proudly on its cliff, as if it had never known winter. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the wind had stripped the feeling from my hands. Luxury cars lined both sides of the gravel. BMWs, Lexuses, something German I couldn't even name. My old Subaru looked like an apology in between them. In the rearview mirror, the face staring back at me was pale from the cold, the kind of face that had learned not to flinch. I tied my hair tighter, whispered under my breath, "Just dinner." One night. The front door opened before I even reached it. A rush of perfume, heat, and champagne laughter spilled into the frozen air. Evelyn stood there, 70, immaculate, wrapped in red silk and self-importance. She smiled like she was about to give a performance. "Renata," she said, her tone sweet and serrated. "You still wear gray? Such a depressing color for a celebration." Her hands were warm. Her eyes were not. She looked me over the way she used to look at a receipt, checking if it was worth keeping. I gave her the same polite half-smile I'd practiced for years, the kind that hides both exhaustion and defiance. Her living room shimmered with polished wood and Christmas lights left up past their season. A jazz record spun somewhere, trying to make the air elegant. Around the table, cousins and neighbors gathered, glasses raised, voices overlapping. Then came Travis, her pride, her son, her shining monument. The Navy SEAL uniform fit him like armor. He moved with that easy confidence people wear when they know the world applauds them just for showing up. Evelyn's hand was already on his arm when she called for silence. "To my son," she declared, her voice theatrical, "a true hero. And to our dear Renata, who keeps things so wonderfully organized in Washington." Laughter filled the room, brittle and bright. I lifted my glass, said softly, "Someone has to." She tilted her head, eyes glittering. "Oh, don't be modest. Not everyone can manage filing reports without falling asleep. Right, Travis?" He gave a small, uneasy chuckle. I let my gaze drift past him, through the tall glass windows, where the Atlantic crashed against the rocks in steady rhythm. The water didn't care about rank, or titles, or bloodlines. It only knew how to wear things down. Conversation moved quickly. Money, politics, wine vintages. The same symphony of small cruelties that had scored every family gathering I remembered. My name came up only when Evelyn needed an example of someone who had settled. Someone mentioned deployments in the Middle East. Evelyn's eyes lit up. My Travis was there, of course. The front lines, real danger. None of that desk nonsense. I said nothing. Silence has always been easier than correction. Travis launched into a story, something about a chaotic mission, a communications blackout, and a mysterious voice over the channel. They called her Oracle 9, he said, grinning. Some analyst who probably never saw a bullet in her life, but kept barking orders like she owned the sky. The table laughed again. Even Evelyn chuckled, that thin, satisfied sound that used to echo through my childhood. I set my wine glass down gently, just enough to feel the vibration against the wood. The stem didn't even rattle. My pulse didn't either. They had no idea. I looked at the candlelight flickering across the crystal, the red reflection staining my fingertips. There are things you learn when you live in silence long enough. That restraint is a form of control, that knowing more than anyone in the room is its own quiet revenge. The night pressed on. Plates changed hands. Toasts multiplied. Laughter grew louder. Outside, the waves pounded the rocks with slow, relentless rhythm, soundless through the glass, but deafening in my chest. Evelyn's laughter rose again, cutting through the noise like broken glass. "To family," she said, "and to knowing your place in it." I smiled, just enough to pass for civility. Inside, something old and buried began to stir. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the moment before anger, the sharp inhale before a storm. 15 years away hadn't dulled it. It had only taught me how to hold it steady, how to make it useful. Around me, everyone looked content, certain, safe in their ignorance. None of them saw what I saw, how fragile their little world really was. The dinner kept going, laughter echoing against the glass. But I wasn't listening anymore. My gaze fixed on the black horizon where sea met sky, steady and endless. Somewhere deep down, I knew the tide was already turning. And before the night was over, none of them would ever look at me the same way again. The smell of grilled seafood from Evelyn's kitchen pulled me backward, back to the winter of 1989, when everything I believed about family cracked apart. I was 12, standing ankle-deep in snow at the Portland National Cemetery. The sky was white and heavy, and the air tasted like iron. I remember watching two soldiers fold the flag draped over my father's coffin, their gloves spotless, their faces carved from stone. One of them bent toward my mother and said the words that have never left me. On behalf of the United States, thank you for his service. His voice was calm, practiced, like he'd said it 100 times before. I stared at the flag, wondering if it was supposed to feel like gratitude. Behind me, Evelyn's breath brushed my ear. "He should have left that job and come home," she whispered. "He died chasing an illusion." She didn't know I heard. Or maybe she did, and it didn't matter. The sound of her voice lodged somewhere deep, a splinter I could never pull out. My mother's shoulders shook quietly beside me, but no one reached for her hand. When the rifles fired their salute, she flinched, and I didn't move. Something inside me froze solid that day, right behind my ribs. After my mother passed a few years later, I moved into Evelyn's house, a place full of expensive things and empty warmth. She made the rules clear without ever writing them down. Speak when spoken to. Smile in front of guests. Don't embarrass her. She liked to remind me that I was fortunate to have a roof over my head. I learned early that gratitude, in her language, meant silence. I kept quiet through every insult disguised as advice, every dinner where she bragged about someone else's child, while glancing at me like I was a reminder of failure she couldn't get rid of. When relatives came to visit, I stayed upstairs, folding laundry that wasn't mine, listening to laughter drift through the vents. By high school, I'd perfected invisibility. I made honor roll, worked nights at the library, came home before curfew. Nothing I did ever registered. She'd look at me across the breakfast table, coffee in hand, and sigh like she was waiting for me to prove her right about something. The day the letter from West Point arrived, the envelope was thick, the seal heavy. I held it to my chest before I opened it, like it might burn through my fingers. When I finally read the words, "We are pleased to inform you," my knees went weak. For a moment, I imagined my father there, smiling the way he used to when he taught me how to measure twice before cutting once. I placed the letter on the kitchen table, waiting for Evelyn to come home. She glanced at it while pulling off her gloves, eyes flicking over the words like they were nothing more than a grocery list. Then she laughed, short, sharp, final. "You? In the army? Sweetheart, they need soldiers, not secretaries." I stood there, letter trembling in my hand, heart thudding so hard it made my throat ache. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, I wanted to say that my father had believed in something worth dying for, and I wanted to believe that blood meant I could too. But all I did was nod, just once, and walk to my room. That night, I packed the letter into a shoebox under my bed, next to the folded flag from his funeral. I didn't cry. I just stared at both, side by side, the symbol of death and the symbol of beginning, and felt the weight of the choice between them. The years that followed were a blur of early mornings and endless drills. 4 years of running until my lungs felt like fire. 4 years of learning how to obey, then how to lead. When graduation came, I pinned the insignia to my uniform alone. I didn't send invitations. There was no one to come. I walked across that stage to the sound of other people's families cheering, thinking of Evelyn's voice. They need soldiers, not secretaries. I promised myself that day I would never give her the satisfaction of being right. Time moved forward, but some things never loosened their grip. Every decision I made was a quiet rebellion against the way she'd defined me. Each mission, each sleepless night, another step away from that kitchen table and the woman who thought duty was a fool's game. Years later, when I had access to the defense archives, I opened my father's file. The cause of death section didn't say accident. It said classified. There were redacted lines and a code I hadn't seen before. Oracle protocol. My pulse slowed, the way it does when realization creeps in rather than crashes down. He hadn't been building harmless circuits or testing equipment. He had been working on a program. The program. The one that would evolve into what I now controlled. I sat there for a long time, staring at that single word, Oracle. The same project that took him was the one that would define me. And suddenly, Evelyn's hatred made perfect sense. My father had chosen service over safety, conviction over comfort. She'd built her life around the opposite. Every time she looked at me, she saw the part of him she couldn't control, the choice she'd never forgive. I closed the file, logged out of the system, and sat back in the dark office. Outside, D.C. hummed with indifferent noise. I thought of that little girl in the snow, clutching a frozen flag, and realized she'd never really stopped standing at that grave. She'd just learned to do it in silence. The smell of salt and smoke from Evelyn's kitchen faded from my memory, replaced by the metallic hum of fluorescent lights. Somewhere between those two worlds, between the woman she tried to break and the one she failed to understand, I found the space where I finally belonged. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten child anymore. I felt like the echo she could never silence. 10 years slipped by, the way years do when your life is measured in briefings, encrypted calls, and sleepless nights. Somewhere between classified reports and satellite feeds, I stopped counting birthdays. By then, I was already a senior tactical intelligence officer under the Joint Special Operations Command. No rank ever carried my name outside the system. Inside it, I was known only as Oracle 9, the voice that could authorize life or death. No one saw my face. No one knew my history. They knew the calm tone that came through the comms at 2 a.m, the one that didn't shake when chaos filled the line. I was the voice people trusted when they were bleeding, when everything was on fire. That was my domain, the in-between. The operation room was never quiet. Even in silence, the hum of machines filled the air, screens flickering with maps, heat signatures, grids of human lives reduced to coordinates. My world was numbers and timing, and the weight of hesitation could kill a dozen men. That night in D.C., the air smelled faintly of ozone and coffee gone cold. The walls were a dull gray, the kind of color that doesn't reflect anything back. On the main monitor, the live feed from northern Iraq glowed like a wound. Mosul, 0200 hours local time. A Navy SEAL team had been ambushed inside the city limits. The transmission crackled through my headset. Static, shouts. Then a voice, raw and desperate. "This is Bravo 1. We're pinned down. Need overwatch." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes scanning the terrain map. Narrow alleys, 2-story buildings, one possible escape route, but it was a death trap. 10 seconds to assess, 5 to decide. Authorized drone strike. Vector 3, I said. Go silent after impact. The command went through. The feed flashed white, then black. The explosion rolled through the speakers, muted by distance, yet somehow louder than anything in the room. For a moment, nothing. Then the voice returned, hoarse but steady. Target neutralized. 3 alive. 1 KIA. I sat back, the weight of those words pressing on my chest. 3 men saved. 1 gone. The arithmetic of war. The after-action report came in hours later. One of the survivors. Lieutenant Travis Witmore. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The name hung there, suspended in the sterile air like smoke that refused to fade. I'd heard Evelyn talk about him for years. Her golden boy, the pride of the Witmore name. I thought of his face, young and smug at family dinners, laughing with the same mouth that once told me I was wasting my life. Now his life had been spared by a woman he wouldn't even remember existed. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. The truth was heavier than revenge. At 0600, the operation report was finalized. The subject line read, Operation Success under Oracle 9. No signatures, no names, just that one line. The only record of the night I'd made a choice that changed everything. I opened the email once, read it twice, then deleted it. No copies, no trace. I went home as the city began to wake, traffic thickening, sky paling over the Potomac. My neighbors were already walking dogs, coffee in hand, lives untouched by the things that happened in the dark. I envied them in a quiet, foreign way. I thought about Evelyn that morning, probably bragging over brunch about her son's heroism, about the medal she'd soon frame. And I thought of the irony, how she'd spend the rest of her life worshipping the boy who lived because of the niece she despised. But that was the deal I made a long time ago. To serve in silence. To protect even those who would never thank me. A year later, I found myself in an event hall lined with flags and chandeliers, a government reception for exceptional acts of service. I attended because attendance was mandatory. Faces blurred together, all polite smiles and small talk. I kept to the edge of the room, one hand on a glass of water, waiting for the speeches to end. Then I heard his name. Lieutenant Travis Witmore. He took the stage in dress uniform, shoulders broad, medal gleaming under the lights. The applause swelled, proud and oblivious. I felt my throat tighten, but not from anger. It was something quieter, something close to relief. He began speaking about teamwork, about the brotherhood of men who risked everything together. He mentioned the voice on the comms, the one who guided them through the dark, the one they never met. Whoever she was, he said, we owe her everything. I felt the floor tilt, not from emotion, but from the strange symmetry of it all. He didn't know he was talking about family. He didn't know I was there, standing 20 feet away in the shadows, listening. When the room rose for a standing ovation, I didn't clap. I slipped out the side door and into the crisp D.C. night. The air smelled of rain. Across the river, the Pentagon lights burned steady and white, a city within a city. I looked at them for a long time, the same way I used to stare at stars as a kid, searching for my father somewhere beyond the dark. I didn't attend any more ceremonies after that. In this line of work, recognition is a liability. You learn that the people who speak the loudest about honor are rarely the ones carrying it. I preferred the quiet kind, the kind that asks nothing back. When I got home that night, I poured a glass of water, not wine, and sat in the dark kitchen. The silence was total. No applause, no chatter, no validation. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the streetlights outside. I thought about Travis again. Not the soldier, but the boy I'd grown up around. The one who never saw me as anything worth remembering. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful, because his survival meant my father's work wasn't in vain. The same code that once took him now lived through me. The same kind of decision he died making. I had just made for his sister's son. It wasn't justice, but it was balance. And as I turned off the light and headed down the hall, I understood something my father must have known all along, that real service doesn't come with medals or speeches. It comes with silence. And silence, when carried long enough, becomes its own kind of truth. The dining room glowed in soft candlelight, polished silver glinting beneath the white linen. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, salt from the sea, and something else, something performative. Evelyn loved a stage, and tonight, this table was hers. I sat near the center, across from her, the ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her chair. The waves struck the rocks in slow, deliberate rhythm, the same way her words always did, rehearsed, controlled, meant to leave marks you couldn't see right away. She leaned forward, swirling her wine. "Renata, you never did marry, did you? All work. No life. No wonder you're still in that little office." I set my fork down, slow enough that it didn't make a sound. "I'm where I need to be?" Her mouth twitched, that sharp little smile she used when she thought she'd found weakness. "Maybe you could help her find a real job. Travis? Something exciting for once." The laughter came on cue, muted at first, then bolder. A few cousins joined in, eager to prove their loyalty to her version of humor. I lifted my glass and took a sip, letting the bitterness of the wine sit on my tongue. It tasted cleaner than the room. In that exact moment, my phone buzzed inside my jacket. 3 vibrations, 4-second intervals. The pattern was unmistakable. Delta Echo 47. A live signal. I excused myself quietly, ignoring Evelyn's raised eyebrow. The night air outside bit into my skin, sharp and cold. I stepped out to the back terrace, wind whipping the hem of my coat. The stars over the bay were faint, blurred by cloud. I switched the device to a secured line, my voice dropping into instinct. "This is Oracle. Confirm code. JSOC command." The reply came, the signal breaking slightly. "Somalia extraction failed. Requesting immediate authorization for secondary route. Approved. Execute Plan B. Keep all civilians alive." 3 sentences. 10 lives balanced in the space between them. When the transmission ended, I stood still, listening to the surf below. Somewhere halfway across the world, men were already moving because of those words. The thought steadied me more than the night's chill. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my coat, and walked inside. Evelyn noticed the wind in my hair as soon as I returned. Her voice carried through the conversation, cutting easily over the clinking of cutlery. "Busy saving the world again?" "Just paperwork," I said, resuming my seat. Her smile widened, but her eyes sharpened. "We all do our part, I suppose. Some risk their lives, and some risk a paper cut." The laughter came again, short, brittle, nervous. I didn't join in. Across the table, Travis lifted his glass, half drunk, half tired. "You know," he began, his words slightly slurred. "I heard from command there's some wild op about to start in Somalia. Total chaos. You wouldn't believe the things we deal with." The stem of my wine glass pressed cool against my fingertips. I kept my expression neutral. He had no idea the operation he was bragging about was the one I'd just authorized. No idea that I'd spoken to his team's commander minutes ago. No idea his safety was already tied to my voice. He went on, describing the heat, the dust, the adrenaline. The table leaned in, enchanted by his valor, by the noise of it all. I listened to the cadence of his story the same way I used to listen to the hum of engines, steady, predictable, never realizing how close they came to falling apart. I looked at him, really looked, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he'd been, the one who laughed too loud and never noticed who left the room when he did. The memory faded as Evelyn tapped her ring against the rim of her glass. "To those who serve," she said, "and those who support them in their own way." Her tone dipped just enough on the last words for the whole table to understand who she meant. Some of us fight in the field, some of us keep the lights on, and some of us, well, we file the reports about it. The room erupted again, polite, hesitant laughter, trying to fill the space her cruelty left behind. I placed my knife down, the silver catching the reflection of the candle. I didn't look at her. Instead, my gaze met Travis's across the table. His laughter faltered. The color drained from his face, as if he suddenly realized what he'd been part of. For the first time that evening, he didn't smile. The air between us shifted, quiet but unmistakable. The others kept talking, clinking glasses, passing dishes, oblivious to the undercurrent pulling tighter beneath the tablecloth. Evelyn went on, oblivious too, basking in her own spotlight. "Of course," she said lightly. "Everyone does what they can. Not all of us are built for danger. Some are better suited for paperwork." Her words drifted like perfume, sweet, heavy, suffocating. I stared at the flame in the candle nearest me. It wavered but didn't break. Neither did I. The room smelled of wine and salt and the faint metallic tang of pride. The same elements, I thought, that build empires and destroy them. No one noticed the small smile that crept onto my face, an expression not of amusement, but of understanding. For years, Evelyn had spoken like this, throwing her little knives across every dinner table, mistaking them for conversation. She never realized that people who wield words as weapons rarely see when they're bleeding themselves. The conversation shifted to politics, then to real estate, then to the price of good oysters. I let it all fade into background noise. My eyes wandered back to the window, where the waves crashed against the rocks, persistent and patient. Outside, the tide was rising. Inside, it was already turning. When dessert arrived, I lifted my glass one last time. Not to toast, not to speak, but to mark the moment. The mask was still on for everyone else, but I could feel it cracking, and as the laughter swelled around me, I sat in silence, steady, composed, unshaken, knowing something they didn't. The storm had already begun, and none of them would see it coming until it was right over their heads. By the time dessert plates were cleared and coffee arrived, the air had turned heavy with wine, and something far less civilized. The laughter had dulled, replaced by a low hum of exhaustion and tension, the kind that gathers in a room when people mistake cruelty for charm. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who thinks she's won. Her tone softened to mock affection. "You know, Renata, your father had all these secret projects too. Look where it got him. You're just like him, chasing things that don't exist." For a long second, no one moved. The hum of the chandelier filled the silence like static. I set my napkin beside my plate, fingers steady. "He died so people like you could sleep peacefully," I said, almost gently. Travis looked up from his cup, brows drawn together. Evelyn's lips curled. "Oh, please. You couldn't last a single day in his shoes. You're soft. A pog. Isn't that what you call them? Travis?" The word hit the table like a stone dropped into still water. Every sound died. Spoons, whispers, the crackle of the fire. All that remained was the rhythmic pounding of the ocean against the cliff outside, the world's oldest heartbeat reminding me to breathe. I placed my glass down. My hand brushed against the silver knife beside it, not in threat, but in instinct. A tiny flex of muscle memory, exit points, angles, distance to the door, all calculated before I blinked. Travis was staring at me, his expression shifting from amusement to something else. Recognition, maybe, or unease. His voice dropped, lower now, the way soldiers speak when they realize they might have misjudged the terrain. "Ma'am, what's your call sign?" I met his eyes. Oracle 9. For a heartbeat, no one understood what they'd just heard. Then the stem of Travis's glass slipped from his hand, shattering softly against the carpet. He stood automatically, posture snapping into the rigid alignment of military respect. His jaw tightened. Evelyn blinked, confused. "What's that supposed to mean? Some kind of joke?" Travis turned toward her, voice rough. "She's the handler, the one who runs JSOC Black." Her laugh came out sharp and uncertain. "That's impossible. She's—" But he didn't let her finish. "I've heard her voice before," he said, barely more than a whisper. "During Mosul, you were the one on the comms. The air thinned, every breath weighted with disbelief. Someone's fork clinked against porcelain, and no one picked it up. Evelyn looked between us, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "Oh, come on. Travis, she's making it up." I spoke before she could finish the lie. "I don't need to prove who I am." "Aunt Evelyn, you already built your whole world on pretending." Her face drained of color. The line of her mouth faltered. For the first time all evening, she had nothing to say. Travis remained standing, shoulders squared. Permission to speak freely. "Ma'am?" I gave a small nod. He swallowed hard. "You saved my life." The room went utterly still. Chairs creaked. Someone gasped. Evelyn's hand trembled against her cup, sending a small ripple through her untouched coffee. She sank slowly back into her chair, as though gravity had finally remembered her. Travis's voice broke the silence again. Quieter this time, that night in Mosul. "We thought we were done." The voice that came through, calm, exact, not a single mistake. "You told us where to move, when to fire, when to run. You were that voice. I didn't confirm it. I didn't have to." The weight of realization spread across the table like a slow-moving wave. Every face, every smirk, every condescending glance from earlier had shifted to something raw and uncomfortable. Evelyn's hand went to her throat, eyes darting from me to her son, as if trying to reconcile two worlds that had just collided. I stood, sliding the chair back without a sound. My movements were calm, deliberate. I had no interest in their apologies, no desire for explanations. "Enjoy your evening," I said simply. Then I turned toward the door. No one spoke as I crossed the room. No one dared. The fire popped behind me, a single spark breaking the silence before dying away. When my hand touched the handle, I heard Evelyn's voice behind me, barely more than a whisper, fragile, desperate. "Renata!" But I didn't stop. The door closed softly, sealing in the echoes of 30 years' worth of small humiliations and slow poison. Outside, the night air was colder than before, and the sky had turned the color of iron. The sea roared below, the same relentless sound it had made my entire life. I stood for a moment on the porch, breathing it in. Behind me, that house, her house, glowed warm and bright, full of the kind of people who believed warmth was proof of virtue. I knew better. Every word, every look, every slight. They had built themselves a stage, and I had just stepped off it. Somewhere inside, Evelyn would be realizing that her power only existed in the silence of others, and for the first time in 3 decades, I had taken mine back. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking against the stone path, each sound measured, steady, final. The wind whipped my hair, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and smoke. By the time I reached the car, my hands no longer shook. I started the engine, headlights cutting through the mist. As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of the house in the mirror, its light flickering against the storm, rolling in from the sea. They didn't know it yet, but nothing in that house would ever be the same, and neither would I. Evelyn didn't move. Her hand trembled above the table, the stem of her wineglass slipping between her fingers. It hit the linen with a dull thud before rolling onto the floor, red spilling across the white cloth like a spreading wound. For the first time in my life, I saw fear crawl into her face. "What kind of game is this?" "Renata." Her voice was brittle, trembling under the sharp edge of disbelief. I stayed seated, steady, not a game. "Aunt Evelyn, you said I was a secretary. You were right. I write the orders that decide who comes home." Travis was still standing, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the table like he was afraid to look up. The rest of the room seemed frozen in the same breath, too quiet for a house so full of people. Even the fire dared not crackle. Evelyn tried to laugh, but it came out thin and broken. "You can't expect me to believe that. You, sitting in Washington, commanding soldiers?" I leaned forward, my tone calm, measured. "That's exactly what I do," reaching into my jacket. I pulled out the small metal token I always carried, matte silver, no larger than a coin, stamped with the emblem of JSOC Strategic Command. I placed it on the table in front of her. It caught the light from the chandelier, and for a second, the reflection cut straight through the silence. No one spoke. Travis's breath caught first. His eyes widened. He took a half step back, staring at the insignia like it was a ghost from another world. "You were in Mosul," he said, voice low, rough with realization. "You gave the order. I didn't confirm. I didn't need to. I gave many orders," I said evenly. "Some saved lives. Some cost them." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. She sank slowly into her chair, her spine curving as though her own body couldn't hold up the weight of what she'd just heard. "You've lied to us all these years." I almost pitied her. Almost. "No," I said. "You never asked." The air thickened around us, the kind of silence that hums louder than shouting. Outside, the sea crashed against the rocks, each wave harder than the last, like the world was trying to echo what none of us wanted to admit. Travis's jaw clenched. He stared at his mother for a long time before his hand slammed down on the table. "Mom, she saved my life. You mocked the woman who commanded the mission that brought me home." The sound of his palm meeting the wood startled everyone. Plates rattled, silverware jumped. Evelyn flinched like she'd been struck. "Stop worshipping her," she shouted. "She's no hero. She hides behind codes and computers." I rose from my chair slowly, letting her words hang in the air before answering. "I hide so you can sleep safely." The words were quiet, but they landed heavier than any scream could have. Evelyn's lips trembled. No retort came. I reached for the token, sliding it back into my pocket, the metal cool against my skin. "Good night, Aunt Evelyn." I met her eyes one last time. "Next time you toast a hero. Remember? Some of us never get invited." The chair legs scraped lightly against the floor as I stepped away from the table. Every movement in that room stopped. No one dared speak. As I reached the doorway, Travis's voice broke through behind me, softer now, stripped of arrogance. "Ma'am, I'm sorry." I paused, turning just enough to meet his eyes. The reflection of the candlelight shimmered in them. Remorse, respect, something like understanding. "Don't be," I said quietly. "Just make it mean something." He nodded once, a soldier's promise. Evelyn sat motionless, staring down at the red stain spreading across the tablecloth, the wine seeping into the fabric like a confession that couldn't be washed away. I left them there in that silence, their empire of appearances collapsing without a sound. The front door opened to the cold night, and the salt wind swept over me, sharp and clean. Behind me, the ocean roared louder, relentless and unforgiving. As I stepped into the darkness, I realized that every mask in that house had fallen, not just mine, and for the first time, they had to see the truth for what it was. Ugly, undeniable, and entirely their own making. The fog was thick enough to blur the edges of the world. My headlights cut through it in narrow, ghostly beams, catching raindrops that shimmered like falling glass. Maine at night had a way of feeling both vast and suffocating, too much space, yet nowhere to go. The road wound along the coast, slick and silent. Behind me, the Witmore house had already faded into the darkness, swallowed whole by the fog and its own shame. Ahead, the sea stretched invisible and endless. I drove with the window cracked open, letting in the cold air and salt, the smell grounding me in a way nothing else could. Halfway down the highway, my secure phone vibrated in the cup holder, 3 short pulses. I pressed the speaker button without taking my eyes off the road. The voice that came through was calm, clipped, familiar. "Oracle, this is command. Bravo extraction complete. All units safe." I closed my eyes for half a second, long enough to see the map of Somalia burned behind them. "Copy," I said quietly. But the line had already gone dead. 13 men alive, thousands of miles away. Their families would never know my name. That was fine. It had always been fine. In Bar Harbor, they were still dissecting family honor over coffee and dessert. In Mogadishu, someone's son had just made it home. 2 worlds, 2 silences. One chosen, one earned. I didn't go back to the hotel that night. The idea of 4 walls and a bed felt wrong. Too sterile after the kind of day that cracks something open inside you. Instead, I drove until I reached the old pier at the edge of town, the one where my father used to take me fishing when I was small enough to believe the ocean would never turn on us. The boards creaked under my boots as I walked to the end. The tide was high, brushing the pilings with a sound like slow breathing. The wind smelled of wet wood and memories. I sat on the hood of my car, looking out over the water that shimmered faintly under the moon. His voice came back to me as clearly as if he were standing beside me. The world doesn't have to know you're brave. Renata, just don't forget it yourself. I had spent my entire life trying not to. For a long while, I just listened to the waves. Every crash felt like punctuation to a story no one would ever read. I could have stayed there until dawn, letting the quiet smooth the edges of everything that had been said and broken tonight. But then the phone buzzed again, one single alert. A coded message blinked onto the screen. New target, Maine. My stomach dropped. The rain started again, soft and steady, tapping against the windshield like fingers urging me to move. I opened the laptop on the passenger seat, logged into the encrypted system, and ran a trace. The coordinates that appeared on the screen made my chest go cold. Bar Harbor, the exact location of Evelyn's estate. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, an echo of an old file, but the code was current, live, and the signature line made my pulse hammer. Someone had hacked the satellite relay, forged my call sign, Oracle 9, and authorized a test payload for target simulation. If I didn't stop it, the system would execute the strike automatically in less than 5 minutes. I didn't think, I just moved. The car engine still idled as I rerouted the feed, hands steady even as my breath came shallow. I connected directly to command. Override signal, redirect payload, priority alpha. There was a pause, static cracking through the line. "Ma'am," a young operator said, his voice uncertain. "That'll expose your location. You'll be logged. Do it. Now." Another pause, longer this time. Then the quiet click of compliance. The seconds stretched. I could hear the hum of the servers in my earpiece, the faint whirring of machinery thousands of miles away, processing commands that would either destroy or protect. 2 minutes later, confirmation came through. Payload aborted. Main secure. My entire body exhaled at once. The air left me like it had been waiting years to escape. I shut the laptop and leaned back against the seat, letting my head fall against the headrest. My reflection stared back at me in the fogged windshield. A stranger wrapped in exhaustion. Outside, the waves slapped harder against the dock, their rhythm syncing with the faint tremor in my pulse. Somewhere not far from here, Evelyn and Travis were likely still awake, reeling from everything they'd just learned, still trying to decide what to believe. They would never know that. While they argued, I had saved them again. A single drop slid down my cheek, warm against the cold. I didn't bother wiping it away. "You'll never know it," I whispered into the dark, my breath fogging the glass. "But I saved you again." The fog thickened, erasing the outline of the sea until there was only gray. I sat there until dawn broke faintly over the horizon, the first light cutting through like forgiveness. But forgiveness wasn't what I felt. It was something quieter, something closer to peace. For years, I had believed that silence was my punishment, that anonymity was the price I paid for duty. But as the sun rose over the water, I realized it was also my gift, the one thing that kept me human when everything else demanded I be steel. I started the car again and let the engine hum beneath me. The rearview mirror showed nothing but mist. The road ahead was empty, open, waiting. As I drove, the message history blinked out one by one, erased from the system, gone as if they'd never existed. Only my name remained in the classified log now. A single entry that would never be spoken aloud. It didn't matter. I didn't need them to remember. The road bent along the coast, the waves crashing beside me, steady and unending. I rolled down the window, letting the cold rush in, filling my lungs with salt and air and something that finally felt clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running operations or running from ghosts. I was simply moving forward. Behind me, the world I'd saved still slept, blissfully unaware. Ahead, the horizon opened, pale and endless, and somewhere between the two, in the hush between the sea and the fog, I found the sound of my own breathing and realized it was enough. 2 days after leaving Maine, I was back in Washington. The first snow of the season drifted down over the city, faint and slow, melting before it reached the ground. The gray of the sky mirrored the building I approached, a block of concrete and silence. The auxiliary headquarters of JSOC Strategic Command. It had no windows. It didn't need any. The steel door sealed shut behind me with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the noise of the outside world. The horns, the chatter, the human part of living, inside. The air was cool and metallic. My footsteps echoed against the polished floor as I walked down the corridor toward the operations wing. Here, no one called me Renata. No one needed to. Names didn't matter in this place. Only precision did. I was Oracle 9, a voice that existed between satellites and soldiers, between chaos and control. When I entered the command room, the lights were already harsh and white, humming softly. Dozens of screens glowed with feeds from every corner of the world, infrared grids, live drone footage, encrypted communications. The hum of machines was constant, steady, almost like a heartbeat. An officer turned toward me, headset pressed against his ear. "Ma'am, we've lost contact with Echo Team off the Somali coast. Possible hostage situation." I sat down at the console, the leather cold against my palms. "Pull up their last transmission." The screen shifted, revealing a red cluster of heat signatures along the shoreline. 18 moving dots, encircling 4 blue ones. My gaze swept across the map, scanning for patterns, timing, distance. Then I saw the list of identifiers on the left. One of the call signs hit me like a ghost. Captain Travis Witmore. I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. But something in me went still, as if the air had thinned. Patch me through. Secure channel. The tech's fingers flew across the keyboard. Connected, ma'am. Static filled my headset. Then a burst of noise, the sharp crack of gunfire. Men shouting. And then his voice, hoarse, steady, familiar. "Oracle, this is Echo 2. We're compromised." I gripped the edge of the console, forcing my tone to stay calm. "Stay low, Captain. You're 10 meters from the ridge. Move on my mark." A pause. Then his reply, curt and automatic. "Copy that." The seconds stretched, long and taut. I watched their thermal signatures inch forward, red dots shifting closer. My hand hovered over the signal trigger. 3, 2, mark. Gunfire erupted, short and contained. Then, silence. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the monitors. "Oracle, we're clear," came the voice, ragged but alive. "Casualties 0. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Good job, Captain." There was a pause. "Who are you?" I didn't answer. The line clicked, cutting him off. When I looked up, everyone in the room had turned toward me. No one spoke. You could feel the collective exhale, the kind that follows near disaster. One of the officers finally broke the silence. "They're all safe, ma'am." I nodded once, my eyes still fixed on the now empty screen. I had just saved the man who once mocked me for being too small, too quiet, too forgettable, and he would never know it. He didn't need to. That was the point. That was the difference between honor and recognition. The report was finalized an hour later. I signed it under my code name. Not my name. The letters blurred for a second before I pushed the file away. My coffee had gone cold by the time the door opened again. General Harlan stepped in. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp against the light. His expression was unreadable, but the envelope in his hand wasn't. He placed it in front of me. "You've been doing the job for years, Colonel," he said. "It's time you wore the rank." I looked down at the official seal. Promotion order, Colonel Renata Witmore. It felt unreal seeing my name written out in full. Not a code name, not a system ID, just me. I rose from my chair and saluted. "Yes, sir." He nodded, studying me for a moment. "You ever going to tell your family?" I almost smiled. "Unlikely." He chuckled, low and knowing, then left me alone in the glow of the monitors. For a while, I didn't move. The room hummed softly, the sound of 1,000 invisible systems running perfectly. Outside, the snow kept falling, brushing against the concrete walls that separated this place from everything human. On the nearest screen, I saw the drone feed from the Somali coastline fade to black. The mission was complete, the coordinates cleared, the operation closed. My hands rested still on the desk, and in the silence that followed, another voice rose in my memory. Steady, patient. My father's. "The world doesn't need to know you're brave. Renata, just never forget it yourself." The words hit harder than any commendation. They always had. I turned toward the reinforced window that faced the night. The snow outside had started to melt as it touched the heated pavement, leaving streaks of water that glistened under the floodlights. The city beyond was quiet, sleeping, unaware. Somewhere, in that same sleeping world, Evelyn was probably telling herself the storm had passed. Travis was likely still awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the voice that had guided him through gunfire without realizing it was mine. And me? I sat there in the cold light of a place no one ever visited, with a promotion letter I couldn't share and a name that meant nothing outside these walls. It should have felt lonely. It didn't. It felt right. I pressed a button on the console, closing the feed, the screens dimming one by one until only my reflection remained. Faint, pale, unflinching. "Mission complete," I murmured, though no one was there to hear it. Snow kept falling outside, soft and relentless. It coated the ground in white, covering everything that had come before, clean, pure, like a blank page. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe I could start writing on it again. It was a gray morning in March when Travis walked into my office. The air outside carried the first hints of spring, but the light through the window was still cold. He stood by the door for a long moment before speaking, hands buried in his jacket pockets, shoulders drawn tight. His voice was quiet, but the words carried their own gravity. "Ma'am, Mom's in hospice. She wants to see you." I didn't answer right away. The hum of the servers filled the silence between us. Then I stood, reached for my coat, and nodded once. The drive to Maine felt shorter than it ever had, maybe because I didn't fill it with resentment this time. The coastline was still the same, rugged, pale, endless, but something in me had changed. For the first time, I wasn't returning to fight or to prove anything. I was going home to close a chapter that had stayed open far too long. The hospice sat on a hill overlooking the water. The building was small, clean, and unbearably quiet, the kind of place where time softened at the edges. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint, salty air drifting in through the windows. Evelyn was smaller than I remembered. The woman who once filled every room she entered with command now looked fragile against the white sheets. Her silver hair scattered across the pillow like strands of sea foam. Her eyes fluttered open when she sensed me in the doorway. For a second, she looked almost afraid I might not be real. "You came," she breathed. I did. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. The bones beneath her skin felt light, delicate. "I tried to make you small." "Renata," she whispered. I was jealous. "You had your father's strength, his quiet way. I thought if I kept you down, I'd keep you close." Her confession hit with no satisfaction, only a strange, aching clarity. For years, I had replayed her cruelty in my mind, like an endless loop of unfinished business. But now, hearing her voice stripped bare of pretense, I realized how fear had shaped her more than malice ever did. Tears welled before I could stop them. They fell onto her hand, warm against the chill of her skin. "You hurt me," I said softly. "For a long time." She nodded, her breath uneven. "Can you forgive me?" The question lingered between us. Forgiveness had always seemed like surrender to me, an undeserved gift. But looking at her now, this version of her, frail and human, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like release. I held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, because I won't carry your poison anymore." Her lips trembled into a faint smile. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye. "You remind me of him. The same eyes." I smiled back. "He would have forgiven you too." The room fell into silence again, the kind that feels almost sacred. The monitor beside her beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. She exhaled, the sound fragile as tissue. When her breathing began to fade, I leaned forward and pressed my hand to her forehead. It wasn't a gesture of farewell. It was peace, finally found. The years of resentment, the cold dinners, the cutting remarks, all of it dissolved like fog over the sea. Her chest rose one last time, then stilled. The monitor went flat. Outside, the wind picked up, sudden and strong. The curtain beside her bed lifted, dancing for a moment, before falling still again. Through the window, I could see the waves rolling in, soft, steady, endless. I stayed there a while, my hand still on her brow, not crying, not angry, just quiet. "Rest now," I whispered. "The war's over." And I meant it. As I stepped out of the hospice, the morning light had shifted. The clouds had thinned. The air carried the faintest hint of warmth. I walked down toward the shore, drawn by the sound of the waves. Each one broke and disappeared against the rocks, leaving behind only foam and silence. For the first time in my life, I understood that forgiveness isn't for the one who asks. It's for the one who needs to be free. I had thought for years that Evelyn's cruelty defined me. But standing there, watching the horizon blur into the sea, I realized she never did. I had carried her bitterness like a shadow, mistaking it for weight I had to bear. And in forgiving her, I finally set it down. The gulls cried overhead, circling the water. A faint sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the waves. I closed my eyes, breathing in the sharp, clean air. It smelled like endings and beginnings. Somewhere behind me, I heard Travis's footsteps approach. He didn't speak, and I didn't turn. He just stood beside me, silent, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon, the kind of silence that says everything words never could. After a while, I glanced at him. He nodded once, his expression unreadable but softer than I'd ever seen it. We stood there until the wind grew colder, until the tide began to rise again. Then he walked back toward the car, leaving me by the water. I stayed a few minutes longer, watching the sea reclaim the shore. The ocean didn't remember what it took or what it gave back. It just kept moving. And so would I. 10 years later, the morning sun blazed over the Annapolis Naval Academy. The parade ground shimmered beneath the blue sky, and the air carried the sound of brass and youth, a rhythm that never grows old. The American flag rippled high above the bleachers, bright and unyielding. I stood at the podium in my dress uniform, the weight of medals catching the light, but meaning far less to me than the quiet behind them. Faces stretched before me, thousands of young cadets, crisp, proud, ready to become part of something larger than themselves. When I spoke, my voice carried across the open air. Even ensure, you will win battles that no one will ever know about. You will save lives that will never thank you. That's what honor means. It's not about being seen. It's about being true. A hush settled. Then applause rose like a wave, filling the space around me. But even as the crowd stood, My thoughts drifted far from the stage, to two faces etched forever in the quiet corners of my memory. My father, steady and unspoken in his faith, and Evelyn, the last person I ever thought I'd forgive. Between them, the two extremes of love and pain that shaped who I became. After the ceremony, I walked down to the lawn behind the hall. The noise of celebration faded into the distance, replaced by the whisper of the wind sweeping off the Chesapeake Bay. A young officer approached, saluting smartly before handing me a phone. "A message for you, ma'am." On the screen, a single photo appeared. Travis standing on the shore of Maine with his wife and a small boy. The child was maybe 7, squinting against the sunlight, hair tousled by sea wind. Beneath the photo was a short message. "He knows your name." Oracle. I laughed softly, but it broke halfway, turning into something that sounded like a sigh. My eyes blurred before I could stop them. The world around me shimmered, flag, sunlight, sea, all blurring into one vast, forgiving brightness. I turned toward the horizon. The wind smelled of salt and spring and old beginnings. The sun reflected on the water until it was impossible to tell where the ocean ended and the sky began. "I am Renata Witmore," I whispered. "I am Oracle 9, and I am free." For a long moment, I stood there, still, unguarded, as the breeze lifted the edge of my uniform and the sound of waves reached the shore. And then I smiled. Somewhere, a new generation was learning that strength doesn't need to shout, and that the truest victories are the ones lived in silence. The wind carried the echo of laughter from the distant parade field. I looked once more toward the horizon, the sunlight catching my eyes like metal and water intertwined, and let the quiet close gently around me.